All right, Panthers. So here we go. We've got the Great Depression, right? We collapse the economy, and we're now in the Great Depression. So we elect a new president in 1832. Hoover is not chosen again. He's rejected resoundingly. And we choose a Democrat, a guy by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is related to the Republican Teddy Roosevelt, who was president in the early 1900s during the Progressive era. So this is Franklin Roosevelt, and he's a Democrat, but he is very reform-minded as well, just like Teddy Roosevelt was. And he has a solution, a plan to address some of the problems of the Great Depression. And it's called the New Deal. I promise you a new deal, a new deal, a new deal, a new deal. That's what he kept selling to the American public in the election of 1932. We need a new deal to address these political problems. Many of the New Deal programs were known by their initials, the first letters of their names. And because there are so many of these different programs, it becomes known as alphabet soup, because you had all of these letters floating around. So the Great Depression, FDR, which is Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal, and alphabet soup. Ooh. All right, here we go. So just before Roosevelt takes office, just before Roosevelt is inaugurated in the office in March of 1933, this, by the way, will be the last time that we inaugurate a president in March. Right after this, they changed the inauguration date to January. So now the president is inaugurated, takes office in January. So just before Roosevelt takes office in March of 1933, Michigan, the state of Michigan, declares a bank holiday, meaning all banking business is shut down for the day. You can't deposit money. You can't withdraw money. You can't make a loan. You can't do anything at the bank, right? And the hope is if we shut down the bank for a day, and usually it's attached to a weekend, right? A Friday or a Monday or something like that. If we shut down the bank for a day, then maybe it'll calm people down and we won't have these runs on the bank and people won't be withdrawing all their money from the bank and causing the bank to collapse and the whole thing. So Michigan declares a bank holiday just before Roosevelt takes office to see if this slows down the bank failures. And it works. And it works so well that by the time we get to Inauguration Day in March of 1933, 2/3 of the state have declared a bank holiday. 2/3 of the state throughout the country look what Michigan did and say, oh, that really helped slow down the bank failures. So 2/3 of the states have declared a bank holiday. On March 5th, one of the very first things that Roosevelt does is he declares a national bank holiday. So all banking across the country will be shut down March 5th, 1933. Again, to try to slow down the bank failures. Okay, so a bank holiday would be like, banks aren't open on Christmas, or they're not open on the 4th of July, or they're not open on Veterans Day, right? Those are bank holidays. So this is just a random, out of the blue bank holiday to try to slow down business failures or bank failures. All right, so then we get to Inauguration Day, March 4th, 1933. Roosevelt takes office. Now, Roosevelt is going to say something in his inaugural address that is going to scare the bejesus out of people, right? There are people like they're listening to his speech and they go, what did he just say? Did he just say what I think he just said? Here's part of what he says. There's Roosevelt giving his inaugural address. And see if you can pick out what he says that is so distressing to people. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Now, perhaps you've heard that before. That's a very famous quote, and this is where it comes from. It's from Roosevelt's inauguration address. So Roosevelt says the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Our true destiny is not to be administered unto, but to minister to ourselves and our fellow men. This nation asks for action and action now. I assume unhesitatingly the leadership of this great army of our people. In the event that Congress shall fail, I shall ask Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power to wage war against the emergency. Oh, so he says that, and people who are listening go, oh, what did he just say? Did he just say what I think he just said? What is he talking about? Right? That's some scary stuff. So what is it that he says? That he's going to wage war? No, he's not going to wage war, like a physical war. What are you going to wage war against? Poverty? I mean, come on. What he says is that really freaks people out is this right here. I shall ask Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power. Sounds like he's saying if Congress is not going to do what I want them to do, I'm going to ask to have a lot of power given to me. Essentially, maybe a dictator. Oof. Well, that's pretty spooky, right? And that's when he says that, people go, he just say he wants to be a dictator? Oh, boy. Oh, this could be bad. All right, so Roosevelt takes office. His first 100 days is a historic 100 days. In his first 100 days, all Roosevelt is going to do is churn out bill after bill after bill after bill after bill after bill after bill to try to address some of the problems with the New Deal or with the Depression, right? So he's creating all these new laws and all these new committees and all these new organizations whose job it is to try to fix the Great Depression. This is all part of the New Deal. And he turns out this unprecedented, a historic amount of legislation in the first 100 days. Never before, and not since this time, has there been more laws been passed in the president's first 100 days than Roosevelt's. All right, so what are some of the things that he does? First thing that he passes is the Economy Act of 1933. Here's what the Economy Act does. It's passed on March 15th, 1933. Cuts the salaries of government workers and veterans by 15%. So the government is the largest employer in the country by far. And now the pay of the employees has been cut by 15%, which means essentially they can only buy 15% less than they did before. So this is only going to hurt the economy, and it does, because there's less money out there being spent. So the economy does go down for a while. He also reduces government spending. So he's reducing the amount that government is spending. Government spends a lot of money, so the Depression actually gets worse. Here's the reason why he does this. It saves $1 billion. And then this $1 billion savings is going to be used to fund these other New Deal programs that he's going to do, right? So the economy is going to get worse for a while as they're saving money, but then they're going to create all these new different programs, all these different new agencies, all these different New Deal things to try to help with the economy. So this is all designed to save $1 billion to pay for these other things. But of course, the Great Depression gets worse because of all these cuts while we're saving money. Oof. Another thing that Roosevelt does is he begins to go on these fireside chats. He's the first president really to figure out how to use the radio. Every president, from Harding to Coolidge to Hoover had been on the radio before, but Roosevelt really understood the power of the radio and how important the radio is to the American family. So Roosevelt begins to go on the radio every single night. No, I shouldn't say every single night. He goes on the radio every weekend or every couple of weeks, and he gives a speech to the American people like, this is what we're doing. Okay, so he begins giving this weekly radio address to discuss, here's the problems And here's how we're going to try to fix these problems, right? And he's giving this speech to the American people. And when he's giving these fireside chats, he's not speaking like he's giving a speech or to the American people where he's saying all these, big flowery words and stuff. He's talking like he's just talking to the people, right? And they're called fireside chats because people had this vision of Roosevelt sitting in their living rooms, drinking a cup of coffee with them and talking about the day's events and the problems and gosh, how could we solve them? Like they're sitting next to the fireside. And so people really like this because he's not speaking as a politician. He's speaking like directly to them. And there were people around the country that thought Roosevelt was speaking directly to them. And they began to write letters to Roosevelt talking about their problems. But they don't address him as Mr. President or Dear President Roosevelt. It's Dear Franklin. Like they know him personally. Now, here's the crazy thing, okay? Roosevelt can't walk. Roosevelt is in a wheelchair. Roosevelt is paralyzed. But that was hidden from the American people. Most Americans in 1933 have no clue President Roosevelt cannot walk, right? They hid it because people wouldn't have voted. People wouldn't have voted for him at the time. Sad but true. They wouldn't have voted for somebody who was not able to walk. So they hid it. So most people didn't know he couldn't walk. And because Roosevelt couldn't walk, he was deathly afraid of fire. Deathly afraid of fire. So he would have never sat by a fireside talking with him because he was afraid. He always had blankets across his lap. He was afraid that an ember would pop out of the fire and land on his blanket and catch him on fire and all that. So he wouldn't have never been by the fireside, but people didn't know that. So they called these to fireside chats. It sounds like he's speaking directly to them, talking about, here's our problems, here's what we're going to do. All right, next thing, he repeals the gold standard. At this time, the American dollar is backed by gold. So for every dollar that the government prints, there's a dollar's worth of gold that the government has to back it up, to show you this dollar's worth $1 because there's a dollar's worth of gold somewhere. The problem is we can only make as much money as there is gold, and gold is hard to find, so there's not a lot of money out there. So on April 5th, 1933, Roosevelt takes the United States off of the gold standard. So now the government can print as much money as we need without any gold, right? We don't need the gold to back it up. If we only have $100 worth of gold, we can only make $100. By taking this off of us, taking us off of the gold standard, now we can print as much money as we need. As long as we can't get crazy and just begin printing money like monopoly money, because then the money is not any valuable. But this will allow the United States to increase its money supply. Okay. All right, so now on to the New Deal in alphabet soup. And you can see this is a political cartoon at the time. Roosevelt standing up again. Most Americans didn't know the president couldn't stand. So this is a political cartoon of Roosevelt, and these are some of the different New Deal programs. The WPA, PWA, AAA. These were some of the New Deal programs that the Roosevelt comes up with to fund the New Deal and to try to fix the Depression. A lot of these are still around today. For instance, if you've ever been to a bank, you see this sticker on the front door of the bank. It's a gold and black foil sticker, and it's right on the front door of the bank. FDIC, this is a New Deal program. Here's what it does. The government guarantees all deposits. The government's going to guarantee your money in this bank up to $100,000, right? That's when it first starts. Now it's up to $250,000, okay? So the government guarantees all deposits in this bank up to $100,000. Doesn't matter. If the bank runs out of money, don't worry. The government will make sure you get your money back. If the bank gets robbed, don't worry. Government will make sure you get your money back. If the bank gets blown up, Don't worry. The government's going to make sure you get your money back. And the idea with this is to increase faith in the banks, right? That the banks are good and sound, and we can put our money back in the banks and trust that it'll be there, and also help ease the run on the banks. So we don't have people all of a sudden rushing to the bank all of a sudden to get all of their money out. So this is still around today. This is part of the New Deal. It was designed to rebuild confidence in the banking system. Next one, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC. This is still around today. So here's what it does. During the Great Depression, people didn't have a job, so they couldn't make their house payment. If you don't make your house payment, they're going to come and take your house, right? The bank will come and repossess your house. So, this is not good, right? Nobody wants a bunch of homeless people hanging around. And the government definitely doesn't want a lot of homeless people, because when you get a lot of homeless people who don't have a job, they do crazy things like revolutions. So this was an attempt by the government to help people stay in their house if they can't pay their mortgage. So what it does is it allows homeowners to refinance their mortgages. Basically, the homeowners will go to the government, and the government will take over the mortgage for the house. The mortgage is like your loan on the house. So now people can get a loan from the government for their house. The government can offer very, very, very low interest rates on the loan. When the lower your interest rates, the lower your payments. So now, hopefully, people can afford their house payments and stay in their house. This is still around today for people that have trouble making their home payments, their house payments to the bank. They can go to the government and apply for an HOLC, which lowers, basically the government takes over their house loan, and they just make payments back to the government at very low payments. And then the big one. This was probably the most popular and most successful of the New Deal programs. CCC, the civilian, stands for Civilian Conservation Corps, and this was a advertisement poster that they would put up around. So here's what the CCC would do. It would employ young men between the ages of 18 to 25 who wanted a job but couldn't find a job. And the government would give them a job and then ship them all over the country to build parks and trails, do some conservation efforts, some logging and forestry, stuff like that. So the government would pay for the transportation for these young men to go wherever they're going, pay for their housing, pay for their food. It would, and then it gave them a monthly salary. Okay. Now, usually where these guys were going to build parks, these are like national parks, big parks and trails and stuff. Usually they're out in the boonies. So there's nowhere for these guys to go to spend their money. Once a month, the government would take them into town so they could, go out to dinner or whatever. But really, these guys were getting paid, and there was nowhere to spend their money. There were nowhere for them to go. So most of these guys would send most of their money back home to help their family pay bills. So this gave young men a job with the government. They got paid a regular salary. All their needs are met, so they don't have to pay really for anything. And they develop parks and they develop trails and do some other conservation efforts. Now, you guys all know something that the CCC built. You just don't know that you know that the CCC built. The CCC built the greatest place in the world. And y'all, I've been around the world and I've seen concerts all over the place. Greatest place in the world by far to see a concert. The CCC built, and you all know what it is. Red Rocks Amphitheater. The CCC built this park. Now, they like the rocks were already here. They didn't drag in the rocks. But the CCC built the seating. They built the amphitheater, the stage here. They built there's trails all over here the CCC built. They built the parking lots. They built all of this was developed by the CCC. And it's the greatest place in the world to see a concert. If you've never seen a concert there, you got to go because you have not seen a concert till you've been to Red Rocks. Next one. This is very much like the CCC, but it's not as successful as the CCC. It was very expensive and it didn't work all that efficiently. It's called the Public Works Administration. It's very similar to the CCC, except instead of doing conservation efforts and building parks and trails and so on and so forth like that, they were going to do these big, very large industrial projects, which would be of benefit to a lot of people, like majority of Americans or a lot of Americans would benefit from this. So they did things like they built dams. They take over the building of the Hoover Dam, which is actually a public works project that was started by Hoover towards the end of his presidency to try to give Americans a job during the Great Depression is going on and towards the end of his presidency. And Hoover starts building the Hoover Dam. This takes it over and finishes the dam. It builds hospitals, builds schools, builds airports, builds tunnels. They do some housing that they build. But because they did these such massive projects, it required so much money, and it just never was as successful as the CCC was. The CCC didn't require as much money to do it, and their projects were not as big in scale as this. But this was another New Deal. It was known as the PWA, Public Works Administration. And then this one. This was the cornerstone. This was the capstone. This was the keystone. This was the most important part of the New Deal for Roosevelt. Roosevelt was going to build the entire New Deal based off of this one program. This was the most important program, according to Roosevelt, of the entire New Deal, the NRA, which is not the National Rifle Association. Right? That's a different NRA. This stands for the National Recovery Act. All right, so here's how it works. The idea is that government and businesses would work together to eliminate what they call destructive competition. Okay, so instead of businesses trying to sell their products for less money than the guy across the street, right? Instead of always undercutting each other's prices to try to attract customers, this is going to get rid of that. Everybody's going to charge the same price for these products. Instead of trying to pay employees higher salaries in order to attract your competitors' salaries, this is going to get rid of that. Everybody's going to get paid the same amount. Okay, government and businesses are going to work together to set price of goods and set the price of goods and set minimum wage standards and unemployment standards, right? So everybody's going to charge the same. Everybody's going to pay the same. Everything is going to be the same. Businesses that would sign up for this, right? Because it wasn't required, you would join this. Businesses would get to display this poster that you see in the background, like the show, look, we're part of the solution. We're working for the betterment of the people. We're not going to try to destroy each other. We're working for the benefit of all. The problem was a lot of businesses found they couldn't make a profit. They couldn't exist in this, doing this, right? That it was too restrictive because they couldn't raise their prices or they couldn't, they were paying too much in salary. That this was just too descriptive and too controlling of the government. So businesses tried to get out of it because they were going to go broke because they couldn't make money doing this. But it was like a gang. Once you're in, you were in. You were never getting out. Once you signed up to be a member of the NRA, you couldn't get out of being a member of the NRA. So there is a Supreme Court lawsuit against this, goes all the way to Supreme Court. Supreme Court in 1935 said that the NRA was unconstitutional because nowhere in the Constitution does it give the government the right to control businesses in this manner. The government can't tell businesses what they can or can't charge for products. The government can't tell businesses what they can or can't pay their employees. Government can't tell businesses when they will or when they won't hire new employees, right? The Supreme Court said the NRA is unconstitutional. And there's the case there, Schechter Poultry versus the United States. So NRA is struck down. Unconstitutional, right? Gives the government too much control over what happens in business. Oh, Roosevelt is furious. Roosevelt can't stand this, right? Oh, the Supreme Court is destroying the New Deal, according to Roosevelt. So Roosevelt comes up with a plan. This is the Supreme Court in 1935. These 9 old dudes. Roosevelt says, old people have trouble doing their job. Sometimes they need help. So Roosevelt wants to add more Supreme Court justices, right? He lost the NRA 5-4. And there's some other New Deal programs that are being challenged on their way to the Supreme Court. So Roosevelt wants to add more Supreme Court justices. He wants to add up to 6 new Supreme Court justices, which would give him control over the Supreme Court. So instead of losing these New Deal, losing rulings against a New Deal in the Supreme Court, now by adding 6 Supreme Court justices, he's going to win because he gets to choose who these Supreme Court justices are. Well, there's a lot of public and political backlash to this. They said, you can't do this. This is an abuse of presidential power. And Roosevelt ultimately backs off. He does not attempt to add any more Supreme Court justices. This is known as packing the court. All right, so back to some of his programs. Oh, this next program, this is one of my favorites. AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Administration. All right, so here's what's happening. This is an attempt to help farmers because remember, farmers, if you think back to the beginning of the year, farmers have a problem because they produce too much food. There's way too much food out there, which lowers the prices of food. So farmers never really make a lot of money. So the AAA, the intent is to go to the farmers and go to the livestock ranchers and get them to reduce the amount of food and meat that they're producing. Restrict the supply. If you lower the supply, prices go up. Now you say, well, we're in the Great Depression, right? How are people going to pay for their food, for this food? Well, the answer is, well, people won't be happy with higher food prices, but people have got to eat and they'll pay them. So people will make adjustments other ways. They'll cut other spending, but they'll go and spend more for food, and the increased prices will help the farmers. Okay? To convince the farmers and the livestock people to do this, the government's going to pay farmers rent. Okay? They're going to pay them to produce less. It's an incentive, right? If you do what we want you to do, we'll pay you this amount of money. And then you're going to get a higher price because you're making less food, right? So this is known as a subsidy. To offset the growing of all this food, we're going to pay you money. So to do this, 10 million acres of cotton just destroyed by farmers, right? Government pays cotton farmers to destroy all this cotton, to increase the price of cotton for clothing and so on. 10 million acres of cotton just destroyed. 200,000 pregnant cows are slaughtered. So farmers would have to show up. They have to take their cattle to this government collection place. The government collection would, check off, oh yeah, you brought in 5 cows, and they give them a check for 5 cows. But they were pregnant cows, right? So they'd kill these cows, and then they would just get rid of the meat, because they can't let the meat get out onto the market. Because if the meat gets out on the market, then there's all this food, and it doesn't really lower the price. So they're going to destroy the cows. They're going to kill the cows and then destroy the meat. 200,000 pregnant cows. Oh, which means it's like a twofer. If you kill a pregnant cow, you're killing 2 cows. So instead of 200,000 cows, you're actually killing 400,000. And then this one, this is a good one. 6 million pigs are killed, right? They're just slaughtered. So here's what happens. True story. In Chicago, when they're doing this, there's these big stockyards in Chicago, like we have stockyards here in Denver for the stock show. So all these farmers from Iowa and Illinois and Missouri and places like that, they're all bringing their pigs into this government collection center in the stockyards in Chicago. And the government is then killing the pigs and then throwing the meat away. So pigs are pretty smart. Pigs are like really smart. And these pigs are in this pen, right? And every once in a while, a bunch of government guys come in, they round up a bunch of pigs, and they take them into this shed. So these pigs are hanging out in the pen one day, and they go, I think there's some bad stuff going on in that big house over there. And the other pigs go, yeah? Why you say that? And he goes, they come in, they take all these pigs. They just took Charlie. They went in that house, and all you hear is squealing and loud noise and a lot of squealing. And those pigs ain't coming back out. I think there's something wrong in that house. And the other pigs go, yeah, I think you're right? So the pigs start talking. Well, they come in, they round up another batch of pigs, but they don't latch the gate on the pig pen. And the pigs go, there's our chance. And all these pigs bust out of the pen, and they're running. And they're running all through the streets of Chicago. Right now, they got thousands of pigs running all over the streets of downtown Chicago. So the government, they got to go get these pigs, right? They paid for them to destroy them. So they got to go get these pigs. So the government begins driving all over Chicago to get these pigs. Well, you can't round them up, right? It's like herding cats. You can't herd them back to the pen. So the government, when they find the pigs, they would pull over on the side of the road and then shoot the pig right there in the middle of Chicago in the streets. Shoot the pig, and then they throw it in the back of the truck. So many pigs are killed this day in Chicago. The gutters in Chicago literally run red with the pig's blood. Could you imagine being a little kid walking down the street with your mom during, in Chicago? Oh, look, Mommy, there's a little pig. How cute. Oh, my God, Mom, what are they doing to the pig? Oh, crazy, right? Insane. All right. By the end of Roosevelt's first 100 days, government had definitely grown, right? In terms of its size and in terms of its spending, the government had definitely grown in size a lot. Things have gotten a little better, right? Maybe a little more tolerable. We can begin to see a little bit of a turn in the economy. However, the Great Depression is not over, not by a long shot. And it just continues to grind on. And it doesn't look like there's any end in sight. All right, so there we go. We're at the end of at the end of Roosevelt's first 100 days. We've got a lot of stuff still left to do in the Great Depression. This was just the beginning of the New Deal. We've got to deal with this. And then ultimately, this will take us right into World War II. All right, Panthers, until next time.